Okay, we are going to talk about temple ordinances and preparing names for temple ordinances and the blessings of doing temple ordinances. And the very first thing I want to do is just a really short breakout, and we're going to break out into 4 groups. And Kelly, can you handle the breakout for me? That'd be awesome. So 4 groups, and I'll put this in the chat. Group number 1, what I want you to talk about just briefly in your group is how does proxy temple work bless? Group number 1, talk about active members. Group number 2, talk about less active members. Group number 3, talk about new converts. And group number 4, talk about investigators. So your question is, how does proxy temple work bless each of these groups? So I'll post the question in chat, and then Brother Anderson, I'll also have you repost that question so it shows up in their breakout rooms. Just take a couple of minutes and answer this question in your breakout rooms. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. I'd like 2 people to share ideas that were shared in your breakouts that you thought were interesting to you. Who would like to volunteer? Angelica, would you be willing to share something that was shared in your group?
Yeah, 100%.
Awesome.
So I was with Melanie and Savannah, and our subject was like the less active members, and we were talking about how like there's always going to be less actives. Like I feel like everywhere we go, we're talking about how like less actives, like, oh, like the missionaries aren't even coming to my house anymore. They're not telling me to read the Book of Mormon. They just stop going because they feel like they don't have a purpose. But what I liked that Savannah said was that like the gathering of Israel is obviously on both sides of the veil, and like obviously we can help people here like on this side and like on the other side, and not only that, but like it'll help them to like go to the temple, and like as they go to the temple, like they're like being reminded of their temple of their covenants that they have made, and that'll help them to like endure to the end. So I think that was really cool that we talked about that.
That's awesome. Raquel, you've been volunteered. How would you feel about sharing the thought that you had? I think that Catherine thought you had something really awesome.
Oh, I mean, Catherine, do you want to share it? No, I don't know.
Actually, sorry, I was on mute again. I guess I got intentionally put back on mute in the main room. But Raquel, you said it so beautifully. I would love for you to say it if you're comfortable with that.
I don't know. All I said was that like with our group was the new converts, and we were just talking about like getting them into the temple and getting experience. And the thing that it made me think of was in the temple, everybody's the same. So like just because you're a new convert doesn't mean that like it doesn't matter the size of your testimony, it doesn't matter the knowledge that you have, and you don't have to feel like there's no inadequate feelings in the temple because everybody's in white, everybody's doing the same like ordinances for other people. And so I think that gives them a sense of like belonging because they know that everybody's doing the same thing and they don't have to worry about what they don't know.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Raquel. That's great. So I have a quote from from President Nelson that I want to share. Let me see if I can find my screen here and move over to that quote. It's this, and this should be familiar to you. This was in April conference from 2018. This has been a theme in our general conferences for some time. And he says, I plead with you to increase your spiritual capacity to receive revelation. And one thing among many things that I have learned is that family history, participation in family history is one of the best ways that I have found to teach me how the Spirit speaks to us and to help me grow in my ability and my confidence in hearing the promptings of the Spirit and discerning those revelatory experiences. And it's not just me. I wanted to share kind of a neat experience that I had while I was helping another family with family history. And this was a young mother, and she wanted some names to prepare to take to the temple for her kids to do baptisms. And we sat down and looked at her tree, and she had one of these gigantic trees, huge fan chart, and every name that we clicked on, everything had, all the temple ordinances had been done. And she looked at me with pleading in her eyes, and she said, "See, I just don't know where I'm going to find ordinances." And so I said, well, let's start with a prayer, and then let's see what the Spirit can do to guide us. And so we did. We started with a prayer, and I said, okay, let's open it up. And I said, where do you think, just kind of think about it, and you pick a line that you might want to go and explore. And she kind of looked at me again with fear in her eyes, and she said, I don't think I can do that. I said, no, it's all right. It's not a big deal. Just kind of looking at the fan chart. Where should we go exploring? She said, well, let's go here. And she picked a line, and we went out and kind of crawled along the family tree. And I said, okay, as we're looking at this chart and you look at the different names, pay attention to what I just call little spiritual nudges. I said, it's not going to be Hallelujah Chorus, probably, but you'll just think, hey, let's go look at that. Within about 5 minutes, she had navigated out and over and down on the family tree, on her all done gigantic family tree, until she found a family where there was a husband and a wife, and they had no children, and there were hints. And within another 5 minutes, she attached those hints, which included a census record, and she found children. And she looked at me, and her eyes filled up with tears. And you know what it's like when the Spirit is there. She said, Sister Bosselman, I can't believe that happened. And it was a moment of spiritual confidence for her. And she said, I think I could do this. It was like one of the best family history moments. And it's not isolated to her. It's something else that has happened. So doing family history is a way for us to practice listening to the Spirit, a way for us to increase that spiritual capacity. So it's a tool, a blessing, and a gift for you, and also for the people you're teaching. And so what I want to do is, I'm going to share my screen again, because you are missionaries and you are preparing to head back out in the field, or you're going to be helping people do family history for the rest of your life. And when we have a new convert, and what we want to do is we want to get them to the temple. We want to get them there as quickly and as easily as possible. So there's a nice, lovely little path that leads our converts to the temple. But along that path, there are some hurdles that can sometimes look really big that we can help them overcome. Those 3 hurdles that I'm going to identify for you today that we're going to work on are, they have to get a temple recommend, they have to get the name into family tree somehow, and they have to deal with the 110-year rule. So we're going to take those one at a time. First of all, I'd like you to put in the chat what you think, what could you do as a missionary, actions you could take or have you taken to help new converts with the hurdle of a temple recommend. What's your role? Okay, so lots of tools. You guys had many more tools than I had thought of to help a new convert with that first hurdle of the temple recommend and helping get them to the bishop and feel worthy to go. Wonderful. So the second hurdle is that They got to get the names into family tree if they want to be able to take an ancestor to the temple. So as I was pondering on this, I would like to hear from you. How many of you, just by a raise of hands, had active temple and family history consultants in the wards or branches where you were serving that you could hand a new convert over to and say, help them get a name ready for the temple? How many of you had access to that? Okay, so the majority of you, you'd be taking that role yourself. Is my assumption correct? As missionaries, you'd be helping them get those names into the family tree. Okay, I wondered about that, and so I kind of prepared this lesson from that perspective. So I want you to think about a new convert, either one from your mission or someone that you know. Picture them in your mind, and I want you to think about whose ordinances that they're most likely wanting to complete. And in the chat box, just put who they want to take to the temple first. It can be a name, a position. I love that, her husband. Savannah, you must have been teaching someone whose husband had died before her. Am I correct?
Yeah, she was 75 years old. Her husband had been dead for a long, long time.
Whoa.
And she was very excited when we taught about temples.
It's so amazing. You just tell me about that and I can feel it in my heart. That's awesome. All right. Parents, grandparents, siblings, mother. Okay. So obviously they recognize the power of the gospel and the necessity of temple ordinances. And the first people that they want to offer those ordinances to are those that are closest to them. So they have to put those names into family tree. And when you went into family tree, it may have all been there for you. So I'm going to show you this awesome tool that Sister Grant actually introduced me to. And I'm going to invite you to go and play with it this week. Let me find my right screen. Here we go. So I'm going to actually open a new tab. And the screen that we're going to go to, and I'll put it in the chat, is called beta, B-E-T-A, .familysearch.org. Little show of hands. Has anybody ever been to the Beta Family Search site? Okay, so this is new. All right, so I am here at Beta Family Search, and I'm going to try and make my screen bigger, and it doesn't get any bigger. Up in the corner, you'll see the same Family Search logo, but there's a little tiny red word up there that says Beta. And I'm going to sign in with my account, and I'm going to use, do you remember the account I created at the beginning of our class that was an empty tree? And I'm going to go to Family Tree. I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Okay, so here I am. You can do this on you can go to beta.familysearch.org and sign in with your regular Family Search credentials. And it's like a sandbox. It's like a place that you can practice. So it'll have your real data in there, but you can play and it doesn't save the data. So here I am. I can practice adding. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a dad. I'm going to call this Carl Christian Osselman, and he's a male and he's living. Okay? So I'm going to create him. Because what I want you to do is this is your first homework assignment, is I want you to go onto beta.familysearch.org, and I want you to pretend that you're one of your investigators or new converts. And I want you to go in and pretend, add a new mom, add a new dad, see what kinds of information it asks for, see what kind of hurdles that they're going to encounter. So I'm going to add, we're going to pretend that my husband Chris here is the investigator, and he wants to do the work for his mom. So her name was Wanda Wilson, and we're going to put her in, and she's a female, and she's deceased, and she died in 2019 in Colorado. So the first thing that I want to teach you is what's needed in order to perform an ordinance. I'm going to say next, and it's going to allow me to create the person. So now I have a record created for her. In order to perform an ordinance, you need a name and a date and a place. Only those three things. The date doesn't have to have a source attached, and the place also doesn't have to have a source attached. If it does, that's great, but we don't want to send our new convert into something that might be difficult for them. If they're excited and they've got some sources they want to attach, or they see some hints there, help them do that. That's great. But the words, I'm sorry, you can't take them to the temple till you've got some sources attached, those words should never cross your lips. Okay, we're removing obstacles. We want them to get to the temple as quickly as possible with an ancestor's name. And so Family Search has made it easy. A name, a date, and a place. The date could be the year that they died, like I just entered for Wanda. So let me show you what this looks like. I'm going to open up Wanda and click onto her person page. Remember, I'm in the sandbox. This isn't going to be saved, but I can practice. Oh no. I have to go into my other account because it doesn't have temple ordinances here. Okay, give me a minute. I'm going to go back to my tree. Okay. So what I did is here in the sandbox, I added another set of parents for me so that I could demonstrate this. So let's go over here, and I'm going to click on this non-member mom, Madsen, and that she died. I apologize. I'm going to have to change this back to 2019 so that I can teach you what I wanted to teach you. If I go in and try and do her ordinances, it's going to tell me it's not ready. This person has not been deceased for 1 year. I had, for years, I was a temple and family history consultant, and I had a new convert come to me and she said, I want to do my mom's work on the anniversary of her death. And her mom had been deceased for almost a year, and she said, so I want to be there in the temple on the anniversary of her death. Unfortunately, they have to be deceased for 1 year and 1 day. So the anniversary of her death is not a good time to take someone to the temple. Because it won't show, you'll get this message that they haven't been deceased for a year. So it's really for a year and a day. It has to be the next day after. So help them navigate that so that you know how long it is. So I'm just going to go back to her details. I'm going to change this to her death date was 3 July 2000. No, it was 1 January 2019. So that's been long enough, and I'm going to save it. And now if I go into ordinances, I can reserve the ordinances. All right, I'm going to pause here. Raise your hand if you've got a question. We did that. I talked about, oh, here's your specific assignment that I want you to do on beta.familysearch.org. I want you to add 2 new people, because your investigators are going to be adding at least 2 new people, starting with their parents and then maybe their grandparents. So I want you to have that experience so you know what it's like. All right, so the hurdle that we're going to talk about next is the 110-year rule. Here's what it is. Melanie, can you read that out loud for us? Can you see it clearly enough?
Yes.
Awesome.
To complete temple ordinances for a deceased person born in the last 110 years, members of the church must either be one of the closest living relatives or must obtain permission from one of the closest living relatives.
Thank you. All right, there's a couple of things here that I want to clarify for you. So this is a deceased person born in the last 110 years, not died. So we start counting forward 110 years from when they were born. So that means we have to get permission for anyone born before, what's 110 years ago?
1910.
Yep. So if someone was born before 1910, in our mind, we're going to immediately say, okay, we might need to get permission. So when your investigators come and they want to do the work for their husband or their parents or their grandparents, in your mind, you're going to start thinking, okay, were they born before 1910 or after 1910? Most of them will have been born after 1910. Parents, maybe even grandparents. So the second part that's important is the idea, this concept of a closest living relative. So a closest living relative is one of 4 people: a spouse, a parent, a child, or a sibling. One of those people will need to give permission. So Savannah, in your example of this sweet sister investigator, she wanted to do the work for her husband. She's the spouse. She's already a closest living relative, so she can do the work. Make sense? All right. Now, I'm going to give you some scenarios, and we're going to do it in the form of a poll so you can practice this. So let me stop my share. Do you want to, yeah, I can't launch the poll. Brother Anderson, you want to launch the poll for me? And I think it's one of the last polls. It's called Permission for Temple Ordinances. Awesome. All right. So what I want you to do is to go down through this poll and answer the question. We'll do the first one all together. All right, let's walk through this. The first question, do you need permission to do the work for your mother who was born in 1940? So there's just gates that we go through. First of all, has she been deceased for a year? Yes, that's gate number 1. Was she born before or after 1910? She was born after 1910, so she falls within the 110 rule. That means you're probably going to need permission from someone. Number 3 is, are you a closest living relative? Are you one of those people? Spouse, child, sibling, parent? Yeah, thank you. You're nodding your head. So if your dad is deceased, you can do the work for your mom. Any questions? Taylor, you had a question. You said, so does that mean you have to get permission if the spouse of a parent is still alive? Am I understanding? Okay. My understanding is that if the spouse is still living, you need to get permission from the spouse.
Thank you.
So your father, who was born in 1920, he's been deceased for a year. Does he fall within the 110-year rule? He does, because he was born after 1910. So we've got to take him into account. So are you going to need to get permission? I love this. Some are nodding, some are shaking. Cameron Steer, who are you going to need to get permission from?
Well, on that one, you said that our mom is also dead. And so we're the one who needs to give the permission, technically.
Awesome. All right. The reason why this is important is that your new converts are going to be really excited about doing some of this work. And you want to be able to guide them with gentle excitement so that they can pass through these gates. Okay, so you want to do the ordinance for your grandfather who was born in 1905. Do you need permission? I love that. Sister Coco, why not?
Because he was born before 1910, so
Yeah.
you don't really need permission.
Yeah, you don't. Okay, your grandmother who was born in 1911. Are you going to need to get permission? All right, I see lots of nods. Sister Fillerup, who do you get permission from?
Maybe her daughter or like your mom or something.
Awesome. Because her parents are probably deceased and her spouse is probably deceased, so it'd be one of her children. All right, the last one. We're going to go to your favorite Aunt Lizzie, who was born in 1950, who asked you to do her baptism when she died. You were her very favorite. And she called you to her bedside and she said, when I'm gone, I want you to do my baptism. Do you need to get permission? I have some nods. All right, you do. Her permission is not enough. So you'd need to go to her spouse or her child or her sibling and get permission to do her work. You could explain to them that she asked you to do that, and that would probably make a difference. But you still need to get permission from a family member. All right, any questions about our scenarios? Is there anything that's not clear? Melanie.
So just kind of to clarify, I think you basically answered it, but you have to get permission from the closest living relative, not just a closest living relative. And what's that order of the closest?
That's a great question and good clarification. Years and years ago, it used to be the closest living relative and there was an order. Now, there's kind of an order. If there is a living spouse, they come first and you need to ask them. If there's not a living spouse, anyone else who falls into that bucket of closest living relative works, and there's not an order. So if it's a sibling or a child, any of those they all have equal footing. Make sense?
Thank you.
Great question. Amber.
So if all of their closest living relatives in that bucket are dead, who is your next best bet? Would it be grandchildren at that point?
Great question. So if there are no closest living relatives that are living, you indicate that on the permission form and you'll receive permission to complete the ordinance. I'm going to share my screen again and show you what that permission form looks like. Okay, so this is Uncle Harold. Can you see Uncle Harold? This is his ordinance screen. I'm so glad that we had, well, there's a long story. I'm not going to tell you the story. He was born in 1910. In September, it will have been 110 years. If we'd like to go do the rest of his work, I'm going to click on this request and it says permission required. Oh, hang on, I have to sign in again. I'm not on the beta site anymore. I'm on familysearch.org. Okay, So I'm going to click on Uncle Harold's name to request permission. And it says right here, permission required. And I'm going to say, I have permission. But Amber, Uncle Harold has no living closest living relatives. So when I say I have permission, this is the form that's going to come up for everyone. The first question is the spouse alive? So that's how you know that the spouse's permission takes precedence. I'm going to say no, because she's deceased also. So it says, which relative gave you permission? And I'm going to say, none of the above is alive. Once I do that, I put my contact information in, and then they will email me with permission to complete his ordinance. Watch what happens if I say, which relative gave permission? It was his child. Now I need to enter the name, the email address, or phone number or mailing address for that child. Could this be an obstacle for a convert? Yeah, you want to be really close by and help them with this permission step. In the interest of time, your 2 assignments are, first, to go to beta.familysearch.org and enter 2 people, so that you have the experience that your investigators are going to have. The second thing I want you to do is spend some time this week. We'll be meeting on Wednesday, so it's really just a couple of days. I'd like you to see if you can find a name to take to the temple. If you want to use Ordinances Ready as your tool, that's fine. If you want to go in and experiment upon the word a little bit, take the example that I shared with you of the young mother who was searching for a place where she might find some temple ordinances. And I would invite you to try that. Sit down with your family tree and a prayer and ponder a little bit about where you might go and spend some time and see what the Lord would have to share with you. And I promise that if you do that, you will have a spiritual experience, and it will change the way that you view finding a name for the temple. I can promise you that. I've seen that promise fulfilled time after time after time. And next week, I'll share my Ordinances Ready story. So find a name for the temple. Go play on beta.familysearch.org. You can even practice merges there if you want to. There's all kinds of stuff that you can practice on without worrying about messing up the tree. All right, questions about your homework?